My name is Alison White. I'm one of the co-conveners of the Safe Food Campaign. And the Safe Food Campaign New Zealand has been around since 1994, so quite a long time. And we basically deal with food matters. We hope to make the consumer more aware of what is in the food that they eat. And we deal with a number of different issues, apart from additives and reading labels, which Sue is going to talk about today. We also deal with pesticides and genetic engineering, fluoridation, basically anything to do with food. And we tend to, what I've noticed over the years is that we tend to deal with issues that for some reason the government is reluctant to deal with, or don't look at the full side of the story on. And so we try to put the other side of the story, because that isn't usually given much publicity, if any. So that's an important role that we carry, to educate the consumer so that when you go and shop, you can have more awareness. Now, I'd like to introduce Sue. So Sue is, should we call them co-convener? I've forgotten your title, Sue.
Well, co-founders of the Food Intolerance Network.
Yeah, co-founder of the Food Intolerance Network. So Sue is a psychology graduate and former high school teacher, and she became interested in the effects on food additives after the birth of her first child 40 years ago. And since then, she's focused on the effects of food chemicals on behaviour, health and learning ability in both children and adults. She's author of the best-selling Fed Up series of books. Sue is helped by her husband, and she runs the Food Intolerance Network through the website fedup.com.au, which has had over 14 million visits. And Sue was an Australian of the Year finalist in 2009. So we're very honoured to have Sue here as representative, and also as a sister organisation. I have, for several years, I've received the Food Intolerance Network newsletter, and I try to publicise relevant issues on our Facebook page, for example. And I've noticed over the years that there's always a lot of interest in this question of additives and food intolerances and reading labels, that those particular entries on Facebook always get a lot of attention. So I'm very pleased to introduce Sue from a sister organisation. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Alison. Well, I'm going to give the presentation, but I would like to introduce my husband, Dr. Howard Dengate. He's got the doctorate in food science, and so if there are any technical questions after the presentation that I'm doing, then he gets those. All right. Okay, well, I don't have to tell you, obviously, that our food has changed in the last 30 or 40 years. And ultra-processed foods now make up nearly 50% of the calories in the average diet for both Australians and New Zealanders. And they can cause numerous health effects, including early death from all causes: cancer, asthma, dementia, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and many more. There's also mental problems, including depression and anxiety, and most recently, these ultra-processed foods have been linked to ADHD, ASD, aggression, and insomnia. And the researchers commented that diets high in ultra-processed food may be harmful to most, perhaps all, body systems. Now, when we first started with highly processed foods, additives were mostly in junk food, but now they are in healthy foods as well, and they are increasingly hidden. And a survey in in England found that most consumers had no idea where the additives were, how many they ate a day, and they thought that if they ate food in their own home, then they would be avoiding the additives. But it turned out that they were all eating roughly the same amount of additives, on average 20 a day, whether they were eating home-cooked foods or foods outside the home. So here's an example, a homemade cheese and ham sandwich. And if you know what you're doing, you can make that with one nasty additive. That's the preservative in the ham. But if you don't know what you're doing, you could end up with 10 nasty additives. And so that's as bad as junk food. At the same time that our food has been changing, our children have been changing. And I presume you know that violence in schools has been increasing all over the world, and in fact, violence in communities. And this little girl, aged 6, in kindergarten in the United States, made headlines around the world. This is 12 years ago, when she was handcuffed by police for throwing a tantrum at school, and she was removed to the police station because she actually injured the school principal. The president of the teachers' union said students' bad behaviour is more extreme these days. Her mother said, well, she has mood swings. She has good days and bad days. I guess that was just one of her bad days. And from our point of view, this is what we hear about food intolerance: good days and bad days and tantrums. And this is what people say to us. 4 days into the diet, tantrums have gone from 10 a day to 1, if that. You can see more on our tantrum fact sheet. Now, from the science point of view, back in the 1970s, when processed foods were just starting, American allergist Dr. Ben Feingold was the first to link children's behaviour and learning disabilities to additives, and also naturally occurring chemicals in healthy foods like fruit and some vegetables, called salicylates, and I'll be talking more about those as we go on. Now, in the 70s, there were some studies using the Feingold diet, and it was medically turned down because it didn't achieve good enough effects. But in the 1980s, more foods were excluded in diets that were like that. There's one called the Few Foods Oligo-Antigenic Diet from the UK and Europe that is now being used quite a bit in Europe. And it is very limited in the foods they use. Or in Australia, the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital Elimination Diet from the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital Allergy Unit in Sydney. And this is the diet that we support because we have found that it works really well as the Few Foods diet, and it's a lot easier to do than the Few Foods diet. However, with the changing times, in 2007, there was a very large study funded by the UK government at Southampton University, and they didn't just look at children with hyperactivity or any sort of problems like that. They looked at the general population of children. And what they found is that normal, healthy children can be affected by food additives, and that additives can reduce the ability of children to benefit from schooling. And they concluded that this could cause lifelong disadvantage because it was already known that reading or behaviour problems at age 7 can lead to educational and occupational disadvantage and depression in adults. So as a result of the Southampton University research, in 2010, there was a mandatory warning in Europe introduced that any of the foods that contain what they call the Southampton 6 artificial colours, the ones that they studied, have to have this warning, may have an adverse effect on behaviour and attention in children. And as a result of that, the food manufacturers in Europe largely decided it was a lot easier to just take the additives out, not put the warning on. And so it's a lot easier to eat foods in Europe. But that didn't happen here in Australia and New Zealand because our food standards, the SANS, Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, decided they weren't going to protect our children. It's up to parents to protect their children. So what I'm going to do is show you one of the additive-free school trials that Howard and I did at a primary school near us. And most of the children in the school took part in it. They didn't have to be diagnosed with anything. This was just an ordinary school.
Over the next 2 weeks, these children from Nana Glen Primary School in New South Wales will be cutting the additives from their food. They have a list of nasties to avoid, and for any 6-year-old, it's quite a mouthful. Sorbates, benzoates, nitrates, glutamates. Sometimes they're words, sometimes numbers. Always in the fine print and hard to find unless you know what to look for. Their parents have been armed with the same information, and the canteen will only serve food with natural ingredients. What food aren't you going to eat now?
I can't eat colours, preservatives and flavours.
The effects of a food intolerance can be subtle. The child who fidgets, the child who can't concentrate, the child who has no friends.
They were pretty good in the classroom, but they really seem to be playing up now. Is it my imagination or are they louder since they've been eating lunch? And this is what you expect, and I think next time we're here you'll see they're quieter and calmer.
It's been 2 weeks since the children of Nana Glen went additive free. We've come back to see if it's actually made any difference at all.
Okay, you guys, hurry up.
First stop, the principal's office. Laurie Renshaw had to ask teachers, students and parents to cooperate, and he was stunned by the result.
Just as an example, this year we've averaged 6 students on detention per week. Over this last week we haven't had 1 student on detention. That speaks volumes for itself.
I can see a...
So, onto the classrooms to see the results firsthand. Kindergarten teacher Jenny Wiseman.
They listen to instructions better, and they're not so impulsive. I think that's probably the biggest change that I've seen, that they think before they do things, think before they act.
Okay, we're going to put that on the stove?
Yep.
Parents also couldn't believe the most seemingly benign foods could be having such a detrimental effect on their child's behaviour. Helen Barrett found out her son Liam reacted to additive 160B, found in vanilla ice cream and yoghurt. Removing it from his diet changed his life.
His behaviour improved, the tantrums stopped, the head banging stopped, and basically we've gone from strength to strength from there. It's basically changed our life because now I don't spend my whole day with a child that says no every time I ask him to do something. I have a child that I enjoy being with, and he's just a beautiful, unique creature.
Most tellingly is what the kids say themselves.
I was getting more friends because I wasn't being so mean as I used to be. I've been sleeping much better because before I used to when my mum or dad talked to me, and I'd always take a while to go to sleep. But now when my mum or dad puts me to bed, I go straight to sleep. People used to leave me up because I used to get really angry, and now they playing with me and all that.
Behaviour isn't the only thing affected, there are physical symptoms as well. There were less incidences of bedwetting, headaches, stomach aches and skin rashes.
Right, so here were our results. No detentions, paying attention better, better sleeping, better health. So how many were affected? Well, the parents said that 60% improved. The teachers said that 90% improved. And what we find is that that is really common. Those figures are really common amongst the number of studies that we've done and others in our network and other people overseas. And I think that the teachers see more because parents are not able to see inattention very well. The teachers get to see the inattention improving. So for SANS, our food regulators say they're not going to do anything because only a few are affected. Well, you'd have to say that 90% is not a few, it's the majority. Even 60% is the majority. So, you know, we need to think about this. And I do want to point out that it's not only primary schools. There was a high school, a special high school for troubled teenagers in the USA that did the same sort of thing for much, much longer and got wonderful results with teenagers as well. So it's not just the young kids who respond. This is one of my favourite stories. It's from one of the members of our group who'd done the diet with her own kids, but she was also a teacher and she was coaching an under-10 girls T-ball team. And she asked them to do a 2-week additive-free diet before the competition because they were going to have 3 days and it was going to be hard. What they did was they won all 9 matches in 3 days to become undefeated state champions. She said these were all normal kids who had never been diagnosed with anything, yet the parents could see a difference. The girls showed exceptionally sustained skill, focus, and teamwork beyond what you would expect for their age. And you can see more about that in our school fact sheets called Eating to Win. So let's have a look at exactly what's happening when people are getting affected by additives. It's really important to understand the difference between food allergy and food intolerance. So true allergic reactions are a quick reaction to the proteins in foods, and this involves the immune system. Proteins in high protein foods like nuts, dairy, seafood. The reactions can include itching, rash, swelling, and breathing difficulties. Now, obviously, that can be life-threatening. So true allergy is taken very seriously indeed. It is relatively rare, but has been increasing dramatically and mostly affects young children. The reactions are obvious because they happen quickly. They can happen within minutes and definitely within 30 minutes, and they can be confirmed by laboratory tests. Now, food intolerance is completely different. It's a delayed reaction to the chemicals in foods, and this can include artificial, like artificial additives, but also naturally occurring chemicals in some foods. And the reactions can include headaches, itchy rashes, irritable bowel symptoms, behaviour, and many more. Food intolerance reactions are much more common than true allergies, and they can affect all ages, from babies to seniors, and they are dose related. So sometimes you can eat the food, and if you're eating a small amount, you can manage it. But if you eat it every day for a week, maybe it builds up slowly. So the problem is that food intolerance reactions are not obvious because they don't occur straight away. They're delayed anyway. They can be delayed by hours or they can take weeks to build up. And there are no scientifically proven laboratory tests to tell you what you're reacting to. The only scientific way to do it is to do an elimination diet with challenges to find out exactly what your triggers are. Now, food intolerance runs in families and everyone is different. So it's really common for us to see that a family will come with a very difficult child, do the elimination diet for the child and discover that everybody else has one of these following reactions that they never realised was due to the same foods or might even be different foods. So we've got headaches and migraines, eczema, hives, rashes, itching, swelling, irritable bowel symptoms, reflux, mouth ulcers, bloating, bedwetting, frequent UTIs, that's urinary tract infections, asthma, stuffy or runny nose, frequent colds, flu and infections. Then we've got the behaviour, irritability, restlessness, inattention, tantrums, mood swings, defiance, insomnia, anxiety, depression, and others. Joint pain, arthritis, gout, heart palpitations, tics, seizures, female infertility, and dementia. Symptoms can come and go and change throughout life. Now, we're not going to look at all of those, but we'll see what we can do. So headaches and migraines, these figures are based on a study done by the RPA researchers. And what they found was that people who suffer from headaches and migraines are most likely to react to the top line here. So MSG, a flavour enhancer, preservatives, and look, salicylates, those natural chemicals are on the top line there. Then we've got artificial colours and one natural colour. Amines, they're another group of natural chemicals, synthetic antioxidants, and right at the bottom, reacting to less than that by a long way, are dairy foods and wheat or gluten. Now, all of the symptoms I'm going to show you are pretty much the same in that salicylates are on the top line, you've got the others all mixed up, and then dairy foods and wheat or gluten on the bottom line. And here are some reports. We've got something like nearly 1,700 success stories on our website. Here's a couple of them. Our 3-year-old had no migraines since we eliminated oranges and chocolate. That's your amines. Also avoid additives, especially MSG. And for a woman who had suffered 20 years of daily headaches, after 3 weeks fail-safe, my headaches just stopped dead. Okay, moving on to eczema and itchy rashes. This was a baby with severe eczema. At 13 months, I tried removing sals, that's salicylates, from her diet. Within 5 days, she went from being in wet bandages, very itchy, irritated and hyperactive, to skin almost completely clear and much happier. But since then, since that study was done, there have been this group of new additives introduced. They were approved in 1994, and we heard from people having problems with them straight away. They're called ribonucleotides, 627, 631 and 635. They are used to boost the effects of MSG. And we have got so many stories like this one now. It is really worrying. I have been covered with an insanely itchy rash for the last 5 years, living on antihistamines and cortisone cream because doctors don't know what to do. My rash started improving within 24 hours of removing MSG boosters. And for her, the MSG boosters were in stock cubes that she was using. Right. Now, here's a photograph of what she looked like for 5 years. That's the rash before she started the diet, and 7 weeks after starting the diet, the rash had completely gone. And that's not the only thing that these new additives do. Since they were approved, the rates of children's allergy have tripled, and experts have no idea why. But this photo here is one of our fail-safers who ate a large packet of chips with the ribonucleotide flavour enhancers in there, and ended up in hospital. That's a photo of him in hospital. He had a major allergic reaction. These additives seem to cross the line between food intolerance and food allergy. And if you want to know more about that, you can see our blog on increasing allergies. Now, moving on to irritable bowel symptoms. And I don't know if you've been reading, but this is becoming very common. Affects about 30% of people in some places. We've got reflux, indigestion, stomach aches, bloating, flatulence, nausea, mouth ulcers, bedwetting, diarrhea and or constipation, sneaky poos, and what the medical journals call a feeling of incomplete evacuation. The mothers call sticky poos because they're hard to clean up. And this is what some people say. My 6-year-old son was diagnosed with encopresis, given drugs that didn't work, soiling his pants every day at school. On diet, the pants soiling stopped almost immediately. And in a woman, diet showed I'm intolerant to salicylates. My IBS symptoms are gone completely. And we're going to hear another story from a teacher about this.
Last year I was asked to go and listen to Sue Dengate talk. I really didn't want to be there. I really thought I knew most of what she was going to say. She was going to tell me that red lollies make children hyperactive. So I went along and I stood at the back of the hall and I didn't really listen. And all of a sudden, up on the screen flashed everything that's wrong with my 32-year-old daughter. I have a daughter, 32, Sarah. She eats good food, she goes running, She spends all her money on health foods and she's always sick. So on this screen flashed up, constipation, migraine headaches, urinary tract infections, even panic attacks, all the things that were wrong with Sarah. So I started listening and I was told that this was caused by eating fruit. I couldn't believe it. I rang Sarah the next day. I said, Sarah, stop eating fruit. Sarah stopped eating fruit. She said, Mum, I always felt fruit was wrong for me. And she had vegetables for a week and I sort of forgot about it. Then a week later I got a phone call in the middle of teaching. Mum, do you know, I think my bowels have worked properly for the first time in my life.
Right, quite a story. Now, a lot of people, and I was one of them, think fruit is the healthiest thing you can feed children, but this is what an expert says. It's a myth that fruit is packed full of vitamins and minerals. The really sad thing is that we don't eat enough vegetables such as cabbage or Brussels sprouts. And people say to me, well, how on earth are you meant to get those into children? Okay, yes, you can do it. I've done it myself. And there are recipes and how-tos in my book called Fail-Safe Cookbook. Now, moving on to gluten intolerance. Celiac disease affects about 1% of the population, but only about 20% of those are diagnosed. And the symptoms can include female infertility. And I have been amazed at the women who have said thank you to me. One even came back with her new baby after she'd been to a talk and learnt about that and became diagnosed with celiac disease. There's also non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and that affects quite a few people. But we have also come across a lot of people who are avoiding gluten because they think it affects them, and it turns out it's the bread preservative. So you need to read up more about that, and you can see our fact sheet on gluten intolerance. Right, moving on to joint pain, arthritis and gout. And the first story here comes from New Zealand. My husband has severe and crippling arthritis. Fail-safe foods have given him relief and mobility. And from a woman who was crippled by juvenile rheumatoid arthritis aged 5 on diet, she said, the pain's gone. For the first time in 23 years, I have no pain. And gout is one of the most extreme forms of arthritis. A man, 47, had gout for 3 years, and everything he tried everything he could, nothing worked. And then he started on Failsafe because his family was on it. He passed the salicylate challenge and failed amines and glutamates. And he's now avoiding those and he's gout free. And you can see more on our arthritis fact sheet. Okay, moving on to asthma. And Australia and New Zealand have very high rates of asthma, and it has been increasing for quite a long time, up to about 30%, up from 10%. And sulfites in an Australian study were shown to affect up to 65% of asthmatics. Now, Australia has pretty lax food rules, and we tend to have more sulfites in our foods than other countries, so that could explain that. And then there's the usual culprits as well. And sulfites are in foods like, for children, dried apricots, cordials, sausages, and mince. Now, it's illegal to put it in mince, but butchers do it anyway, especially near the weekends, Friday, Saturday. And we actually sell at cost test strips where you can test mince to see whether it has got sulfite preservatives in it or not. And for adults, wine and prawns are big problems. And you can see a lot more on our sulfites fact sheet. Now, there's a 30-minute rule. People do not recognise the effect of a food unless a reaction occurs within 30 minutes. But most intolerance reactions occur hours or even days later, or build up slowly, or occur after triggers. And that especially happens with asthma. So if you've got a chest infection, or it's a cold night, or exercise, that can trigger the asthma. And Daryl's going to talk about that.
since about 18 months of age, he's had asthma on and off. And it took us a while to work out what was going on, but one of the things that was happening was every time he ate dried fruit, 3 or 4 days later, he'd be sensitive to things. So if he had a chest infection, he'd get an asthma attack when normally he wouldn't. If he had a cold snap in the middle of the night, like around springtime, he'd have an asthma attack, starting out coughing, just as a cough, and then it would develop into a full-blown asthma attack. And we realised that if we could keep the dried fruit and the sulphites out of his diet, a lot of these problems would go away.
Yeah, well, thank you, Daryl. A lot of people, the triggers get the blame. They don't realise that there's food behind it. Okay, moving on to behaviour. Now, okay, it looks like it's for children, but it's not only children. It can also apply to adults and seniors, especially seniors who have dementia. Irritability, restlessness, sleep disturbance, that includes difficulty falling asleep, frequent night waking, restless legs, difficulty concentrating, loud voice, motor or verbal tics. And one mother wrote that her son had been identified as gifted, but she said he has a severe temper, he's disruptive, tearful, moody, and he makes silly noises. And all of these can improve when you do the diet. Then there's the defiant ones who can end up being diagnosed with oppositional defiance. Irritability is the core feature, losing temper, arguing with adults, refusing requests and defying rules, deliberately annoying others, blaming others for their own mistakes, touchy and easily annoyed, angry and resentful, spiteful or vindictive. All of those can go completely if you get the diet right. And then there are the quiet ones. Now, these are the ones who often get overlooked because they're quiet, they're not difficult, but they are not doing as well at school as they are capable of because they're being affected. So disorganised, forgetful, inattentive, foggy brain, difficulty concentrating, speech delay, reading delay, uneven handwriting, reversals, unexplained tiredness, grisly or unhappy, anxiety, panic attacks, depression, self-harm, suicidal thoughts. And a teenager is going to tell us about this. Now, her face looks blurred because we're doing that to protect her privacy.
I'm 17 years old. I was diagnosed with depression, ADHD, and oppositional defiance disorder at the age of 6. Tried to kill myself 3 times. My life was a mess, basically. My mum found the diet, the fail-safe diet, and she put me on it, took all away my favourite lollies and everything, and within a week we saw a change. I wasn't as sick, my asthma basically didn't exist anymore. My depression basically vanished, and I've been really happy ever since. Haven't been getting colds as much, and basically saved my life.
Right. And you can see our depression blog on our website. Now, the autistic ones are considered to be the most sensitive of anyone. And for them, RPA recommends the full Royal Prince Alfred Hospital elimination diet, including gluten-free and dairy-free, and also avoiding fragrances such as cleaning chemicals and cosmetics. And here's a comment from a teacher's aide about an ASD 5-year-old. Off diet, he would be in the corner banging his head, no speech. On failsafe, he was back to normal development. And you can see a lot more about that in our autism blog, and also Ethan's recipes. There's a booklet from an autistic boy who was at special school, and he ended up in mainstream schooling thanks to the diet. Now, very recently, brain scientists in America have discovered that there's a link between propionate preservatives and autism. And even more recently, French scientists have discovered a link between propionate preservatives and dementia. Autism has been rising dramatically, and the brain scientists suggest that it might be due to these propionate preservatives, which are the ones that are used in bread, but they are now used in all sorts of other things, including meat and sauces. They're all over the place now. My 3-year-old son was going to be assessed for autistic disorders. Since taking him off all commercial bread, the change in 4 months has been amazing. Okay, now additives to avoid. There are only about 50 of them. So we've got colours. All artificial colours can cause problems. You can either do a challenge to find out if they affect you, or you can decide to avoid them. But then we've got natural colours. There are 2. That one's not too bad. This one is really terrible. What I've done is I've highlighted 3 newish additives that are really, really bad. This is the first one. And then we've got the propionates that I've just been talking about, propionate preservatives, and the ribonucleotides that I've already mentioned. So with the preservatives, we've got 5 different sets of preservatives, synthetic antioxidants, the flavour enhancers, including MSG, and then we've got flavours, and they don't have to list what the flavours are, but they will usually have salicylates, amines or glutamates in them. Right. Now, you might think it's easy to avoid them if you just know which numbers, but the food industry is fighting back. They have developed what they call the clean label trend, which basically means they are hiding the additives. So they're doing that by removing the numbers and chemical sounding names and using instead healthy claims such as free from, all natural, no artificial. And instead of having anything that sounds like additives, they're using innocent sounding ingredient names. Let's have a look at this. Okay, how to read labels. First of all, ignore anything on the front of the packet. Health claims like original, fresh, 100% finest ingredient, no nasties, anything like that. And free froms, gluten or colour or preservatives. There's always something else. Okay, what you have to read is the ingredients list. And you'll see here are the 2 ribo flavour enhancers. That means that MSG is in there somewhere, but where is it? We can't see it. Okay, it's here where it says hydrolyzed wheat. This is how they are hiding them, innocent sounding ingredients. And look at that, it's even gluten-free. I mean, there's no way that it sounds like MSG. You can read our blog, 129 ways to add MSG and fool the consumer. Okay, moving on. When they say something is natural, people automatically think, oh, this is really good. But as I said before, a natto 160B yellow colour is one of the worst of all additives. Remember Liam in Nana Glen, he was the one that was having problems with that. It changed his life. Okay, here are 2 more. This is a little boy, 2-year-old, headbanging so badly that it caused this, he had bruises on his forehead for months. And the kids have to grow up to be much older, to be teenagers, before they can say why they do the headbanging. It's because they've got such a terrible headache. And then here's a story from a 16-year-old son. A natto results in tears, agitation and aggression in my 16-year-old son. Without your sight, I'm certain he would have been diagnosed with serious mental health issues. And you can see a lot more on our natto fact sheet and what to buy on our fail-safe shopping list. Now, no added flavours. So that's on the front, but these are Australia's favourite wraps, and they are considered to be very healthy. But if you read the ingredients list on the back, they've got 2 nasty artificial colours and 2 nasty preservatives, including the bread preservative. So the bread preservative gets even worse when it comes to innocent sounding ingredients. These are propionate preservatives that would have once been called preservative 282 or preservative 281 in all flour products. And now they are listed, they can be listed as cultured dextrose. And look, it says no preservative 282. And they just regard it as a healthy, natural preservative. And it can be cultured or fermented dextrose, whey, rice, wheat flour. people have no idea what's going on. People who've been avoiding this and regard it as poison for years can be tricked by the way it's being labelled now. And in Australia, there is now a bread being sold in our two biggest supermarkets, MEB bread. It's Middle Eastern bread. It contains only flour, water, yeast, sea salt, and that's it. Only 4 ingredients. And this is what proponents of avoiding UPF say, that if you only buy things with 4 ingredients or less, you're probably not going to get ultra-processed foods. So I think that's quite interesting. I don't know in New Zealand whether you can get something like that. I know we were there earlier this year and we looked at the wraps and there were a lot of them that contained the bread preservative. You've just got to be very careful. And you can see a lot more on our website, on the blog, called Beware Cultured Dextrose. That is the highest read blog we've got. And also on our fail-safe shopping list. Right, now moving on to the natural food chemicals. Salicylates are in varying amounts in fruit, veg, herbs, spices, and added flavours. Amines are in chocolate, cheese, processed fish and meat. Glutamates are in aged or fermented foods, tasty foods, and soy sauce. And very quickly, this is done, Dr. Anne Swain's analysis of salicylates done in 1985. You can see that if you eat low salicylates, according to the RPA charts, there are no salicylates at all. Moderate, a few more, and even high isn't too bad. Once you get into very high, citrus, most berries, tomato products, mint flavours, sultanas, then it's very, very high. And so flavours that you get in ultra-processed foods are natural foods in unnatural amounts. You also have to be careful of medications. This one says colour-free. But this mother wrote, after a dose of colour-free Panadol, my 5-year-old went back to his pre-diet ways, crying non-stop, angry, rages and night terrors. Why would that happen? Well, look what it's got in it, strawberry flavour, and that is extremely high in salicylates. And then you've got to worry about other things that they don't put on the label too. Okay, toothpaste. And it claims sugar-free, gluten-free, but what's it got in it? Contains flavours. Now, mint flavours are very, very high, as you already saw, and an artificial colour that can be absorbed by mucous membranes in the mouth. People think you're okay if you don't swallow the toothpaste, but no, it can affect you anyway if you react to those. So by now you're thinking, well, what can we eat? Okay, in the small print, conditions apply. So it depends on you, what you react to. And if you do the diet and do challenges, you'll know. But overall, most people can manage grains unless they have to avoid gluten. That's grains with no additives. Meat, fish and eggs can be a major problem for people with amine or glutamate problems unless they're very fresh. Fruit and vegetables, of course, it depends if you react to salicylates and as to which ones you can eat. Dairy foods, what we find is that a lot of people who react to dairy foods can actually manage A2 milk or the other milks like oat, soy, rice milk. Now, alcoholic drinks of choice for fail-safers are gin, vodka and whiskey, but that's for the adults, not the children. Then we've got sugar. Now, most people think that sugar causes children's hyperactivity, and I was one of them. But no, RPA studies have shown that it's not the sugar, it's more likely to be the salicylates. Now, white sugar, caster sugar and icing sugar are low in salicylates, and also so is real maple syrup. But raw sugar, for instance, is higher in salicylates. So you've just got to be careful about what you're eating. And I've put chicken and chips here, but that doesn't mean to say that you can go to your local takeaway store and buy chicken and chips. What it means is that if you buy those things, cook them at home yourself from first principles, not using any UPFs, then you can get away with it. And you can see a lot more on our fail-safe shopping list. So a lot of people say, well, where can I start? I don't want to do the full diet. Can I just cut down? Yes, you can. Water is the best drink. Buy preservative-free bread or cook it yourself in a bread maker. Avoid nasty additives, including flavoured products. Avoid non-essential medications and supplements, and that's what RPA say. That can really be a problem. Avoid dairy products if necessary and gluten if necessary. Stick to 2 pieces of fruit a day and 5 or more veggies. And if necessary, reduce or avoid the really high salicylate citrus, berries, sultanas, tomato sauce, mint flavours. And this mother said, I cut back my 5-year-old daughter's intake of fruit to about a quarter of what she normally had. Within days, we saw dramatic changes. Her behaviour evened out. She was more sensible and obliging, less aggressive and defiant, altogether much more pleasant to be with. Or do the full diet, supervised by one of our listed dietitians. And here's a story. After 44 years of health problems, I worked out the salicylate connection. Your website has been life-saving. And on our website, you can see under support the fail-safe dietitians list. And that's it. For more info, you can see my books. As you can see them, my books and DVD. The DVD, Fed Up with Children's Behaviour. A lot of adults say, hey, it's not just about children's behaviour, it's about adults as well. People say to me, which book should I read? Dietitians say it saves an hour of consultation time if you've read Fed Up before you go. We sell them through the website, but worth checking in your library. Our DVD is free on YouTube. We've got the Facebook group, Sue Dengate Failsafe Group, very supportive group. And our website, fedup.com.au, that can cover things like how to start, checklist of common mistakes, shopping list, free recipe booklets, and dietitians list. Right, I've come to the end. Are there any questions?
I've got a question. So what about organic foods? I mean, I'm guessing that the vast majority of these additives would not be allowed in certified organic foods. Obviously, salicylates are different because that's a naturally occurring thing. But is that your understanding that all of those additives that you're talking about are not allowed in certified organic foods?
Well, we certainly think that should be the case, but it isn't. There are some organic breads in Australia that have the bread preservative in them with the innocent sounding ingredients that have been okayed as organic. We're pretty angry about that.
Is that a decision of that particular certifier?
Yes.
To allow those?
The organic standards in Australia at least allow that specifically to occur, that they can use propionates in other forms as ingredients, as long as it's not a number. And I'm afraid the same thing applies to many glutamates, that they can include hydrolyzed vegetable protein and a whole raft of other high glutamate ingredients. And they don't have to say, oh, by the way, this contains glutamates.
Right, so we still need to be very closely looking at our organic labels.
You do.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. That's why he answers the technical questions. Right. And also talking about RPA has actually said that organic foods are likely to have higher salicylate content because salicylates are actually like pesticides that they're using to protect themselves. But as far as we're concerned, we eat organic. If you go slowly after you've worked out what affects you, then you can build up a tolerance. Yeah, and that's what we try to do. Okay, any more?
That's really interesting. The thought that occurs to me with our own certifying organic agencies such as BioGrow and A Quality, the governmental run one, is that we should check whether they allow propionates in organic bread in New Zealand. That would be really interesting to find out.
Yes, you're right.
There's currently in New Zealand the National Organic Standard is being formulated at the moment, and that will apply across the board for any certifier, although they could set a higher bar if they want, individual certifiers. Yeah.
Particular concern with the fact that they're adding propionates is that the Food Standards Code, which Australia and New Zealand follow, actually regulates how much you're allowed to add of propionates if it's a white powder. Once you start adding it as a fermented wheat flour or whatever, nobody has any idea how much is in there. It could be far higher. I've raised this as an issue of importance for a couple of years directly with FSANZ. I'm not getting anywhere, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's of interest. From what I understand, and I have looked at this issue before in regard to organic standards of additives as opposed to conventional packets and so on, that organic standards usually have a positive list, and that's all you can use. You can't use, if you use anything else, you have to apply to the certifying agency if that particular ingredient can be, that particular additive can be used. So that's my understanding of the organic standards, mostly with BioGrow. That's the biggest company.
I would be, okay, sorry. I would be very interested if anyone in New Zealand can look at your bread, your organic breads, look particularly at the wraps and see if you can spot these hidden additives, and please let me know, or let Alison know and she'll let me know. I'd like to be able to make a point of that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to cover, particularly as you say, because the propionates, which are found naturally, you may argue, and who can argue with a label like cultured wheat flour or whatever? That's hard to decipher, that is actually added propionates, which in a confined form may be fine, but once you isolate them are a problem. And I think this is the problem with glutamates too. I mean, I've heard people arguing against not using MSG on the basis, oh, glutamates are in food anyway, but in the natural form, it's bound by other amino acids. And so there is that protective factor in mushrooms and tomatoes, for example, which people may not react to normally, but if they find glutamates isolated, and one term that has been used is manufactured glutamates, and this is the real issue. But it's interesting to have you highlight, Sue, the fact that people can discover they have allergies to natural foods as well, and they have to avoid them because of that. And that to me seems such a shame. I mean, are people reacting to natural foods more than they used to? That is my question for you. So,
yes, in my opinion, they are, because the reactions can be triggered by illness, medications. So we've got quite a few people who have said to us, look, I've developed this problem, sensitivity to salicylates, since I was taking a medication that it can be even aspirin for a start, but many others that are like that. But also you think of what our food's like. Back in the days when people were eating traditional food, they couldn't buy and eat a cup of berries every day, or drink orange juice that's made from numerous oranges, not just one. Everything's more intense. There's a lot more of it around. It's just the way supermarkets have organised our food, and then add in the medications. And even if you're taking supplements, you know, you can be getting a much bigger dose than you would normally get. And this can make people more sensitive to salicylates. Yeah.
great. Thanks for explaining that. So, Philippa, you've got a raised hand.
Oh, yeah, actually, well, you've just touched on supplements. So I was going to ask about dietary supplements and vitamin combinations and so on. So that they are, like, you know, likely or possible to have these additives in as well.
Yes, definitely. Some will have additives. What Royal Prince Alfred Hospital says, like you saw, is that you should avoid unnecessary ones. But what they say is that while people are doing the 3-week elimination diet, the strict one, then they recommend taking small doses of additives that they recommend. Sorry, not additives, vitamins and minerals. But then for people doing the full strict diet, we recommend doing it with an experienced dietitian, because they will then check nutrition and make sure that you're getting what you need at the end. And you tend to keep on building up. If you reintroduce the food slowly, you build up your tolerance and you can manage more and more. And that's where you can test things and maybe be able to take certain supplements if you want to, and things like that.
Great. Well, that's good to have that advice. So now I'm aware of the time passing, 7 minutes over, and I really appreciate being able to learn from you, Sue, because you and Howard know so much about these issues. Does anybody else, before we close and stop the recording, does anybody else have any questions? Anybody want to give a quick reaction? Or through chat?
I'd like to say thanks for the opportunity to relate to a sister organisation, so to speak. It's very interesting to look over your shoulder and see that you're grappling with the same issues that we are.
Yeah. Ditto me. It's really good to hear that expertise, to hear that knowledge, and I'm so impressed with your outreach through your website, through your different stories of what has happened to individual people. I think this is really good, apart from the science backing it all up. And this is what I really admire about your efforts and your website.